Welcome to Margin of Thought, where we make space for the questions that matter. I'm your host, Priten, and together we'll explore questions that help us preserve what matters while navigating what's coming. Oftentimes, we confuse following the rules with doing the right thing. Today, I'm speaking with Jessica Maddry. Jessica is an education researcher and consultant whose work tackles the gap between how education policies are written and how they actually play out in our schools. In today's episode, Jessica and I confront the meaning of ethical policy, discuss the rise of surveillance culture, and dig into today's erosion of deep literacy. So how exactly can we make our schools genuine environments for human connection instead of control? Jessica and I had a lengthy pre-recording conversation, or rather commiseration session, and so today we get to start right away with her thoughts on reading. Let's get started.
In school right now, they really the kids don't get like a whole book. I have feelings about that, obviously. They are so busy breaking down the parts of a story that they forget the whole story. And so finally, and she's had some other really interesting experiences with the technology. So she taught herself to read during COVID. I would love to say it was like my great parenting. It was not. She was bored, I think. And so that happened. She was given a book because her reading level is much higher than her academic year, right? Than her age. And so it had all this slang in it, which is fine. I am not opposed to slang. But also she spent the great majority of her childhood in the Middle East. So I isn't really on her radar. She came to me with the book. Well, I say book, it's on an iPad. And she's like, what is this word? And I'm like, ooh, right. Context would be great. But it was very hard for her because she was transitioning on the app to these appropriate reading levels. But those reading levels also do not account for the fact that she was in third grade. It was hard enough for her to transition into the Deep South, having lived overseas for all these years and actually just understand the children in the Deep South of Louisiana, much less read what they were saying. So it was a really interesting transition for her. But now, because she's done all these AR points and whatever other compliance tool they've got set in place for this, she is allowed to read novels from start to finish. And it's only taken till fifth grade.
This has now come up in the last 3 conversations I've had that were recorded for our podcast. And this is the most frightening thing to me. The not reading a book start to finish. And even this seems like the exception. I did a bunch of interviews this summer with college students, and most of them, the last time they remember reading a full book was middle school at best. But high school is already so standardized testing focused that it's passages. You're just can you read a passage and do what you got to do with the passage because that's all you're going to be tested on? What's the point of reading anything more than that? And when they are assigned a book, it's if you write a book report, I'll Spark Notes it, I'll chat, pre-chat GPT, but get a couple of things and then just bullshit my way through it because I don't really want to read. There's just that intrinsic motivation to read a book is not there.
Because they don't have stories. They don't get the joy of the stories. And then I will tell you this from spending the last week in a middle school, and it reminded me a lot of when I very first started teaching, which, I was originally in drug courts. I didn't start teaching until I had my first child and was 30 years old. So my perspective was wildly different from probably the 20-something-year-olds coming right out of university anyway. But I was so shook because everybody needs to be silent all day. And I'm like, this is wild. Why is nobody talks? And it's like that where I am now, the compliance issues where even my own child recently was suspended because he had his phone off in his pocket, but they could see the outline of the phone in his pocket and it's supposed to be in his backpack. And I'm like, so we're criminalizing a behavior that is absolutely legal and in most places expected. You're not his parent. You don't pay for it. And also your decision making process ends at 227 when he leaves here.
That policy is made in such a myopic way, right? Like they've decided that cell phones are a distraction, probably some truth to it. They have then created a policy that like it has to be in your backpack. Okay, that's something towards this like avoiding the constant TikToking or whatever in class. But the necessity of enforcing that policy in that instance is not backed by the ethical reason by which you made the policy. There is a circular process that needs to take place when you're making rules and regulations and laws and coming up with the ethical decision. And so it's like, you have made a policy for a very particular reason. If your punishment is not in service of that reason, then you're just punishing for the sake of punishing, right? Like if the student has the phone off in their pocket, it is still doing what the policy intended for it to do. The student is not distracted by the phone. Like whether it's in the backpack or the phone is ethically irrelevant. Like that is not the thing of ethical importance. That is not why you decided to sit down and write something. You sat down and made a policy because it was a distraction. If it's not a distraction, ignore it.
People have gotten very lost in the difference between law, policy, and ethics. Like those have all somehow merged into this single concept. And I'm like, actually, there's three very different processes. You can have totally legal behavior that is also not ethically sound. And then you have to start dividing out people's moral compass. And that is really where I think like some of the start of these conversations has been missed. I had a really great conversation. I did a week on campus for this PhD program. And there was a man there. He spent 8 years at the Vatican, very philosophical guy. And we were talking about education amongst all the other things in the world that seem to be quite out of balance at the moment. And I was like, it's very strange because it feels like there are so few people who are like looking past their nose or even around the corner. So sure, we put this policy in place. Sure, we do all those things like job done, finished. Like, actually, no, you're not. Like, in order to build something that's valuable, if you haven't thought this through on what this looks like in 5, 10, 15 years from now, then you're really not doing anybody any service by just putting these things in place. Have you read about the school to prison pipeline? When I start looking at some of the policies and things, it reminds me a lot of that. And, when I had that situation with his phone, they literally said to me, well, his punishment is we take it overnight and take it for the weekend. And I was like, you absolutely do not. There is only one person in their world that parents them, and that happens to only be me. So it's just me doing this thing, sir. So that's going back with me because also there are other things like when it comes to the cell phone policy, which is a huge one in schools right now, they say, well, we didn't have them when we were kids. True, but there were millions of payphones like everywhere we went. I don't know the last time I saw a payphone.
This is where I think the disconnect is so deep because these policies are made in a rush. They're made without full consultation with all the stakeholders. And then the policies are served as the ends themselves, right? I think most schools have kind of realized just following the law is not enough, right? Millions of examples of why the law itself can be very immoral, right? So like it was legal to be segregated. So just saying something is legal is not a great enough reason to say it's a good idea. And then like we need policies, right? It's not like we can just operate just off of individual decisions all the time because the amount of decisions that we in a school make on a daily basis are innumerable. If you had to reason through it every single time, we wouldn't have time to do anything else. But those policies are meant to be guideposts. They're meant to be shortcuts. They're not meant to be like our legal constitution of if you don't follow this rule by rule, like here's the prison cell in our school, right? Like it's like
I've worked at a school that had one.
and it's most schools have some sort of like little prison system. They won't call it that, but
Hey, call it what it is, though, right?
Yeah, and so it's like, but the policies exist to help you make decisions on the fly, not to like make the decisions for you constantly, no matter what the other relevant context is. That is like the compliance versus ethical decision making distinction that I think folks are really not grasping, because I think like all of these like quote unquote zero tolerance policies, and there's obviously context in which a zero tolerance policy is good for the safety of our students, but there's the universal blanket idea that everything is a zero tolerance policy. There's way too much nuance when you're educating a bunch of students with all different backgrounds and all different parents and all different economic statuses and all different levels of knowledge of the policy and uses of all the technology and non-technology. I mean, they're just like, you cannot have a zero tolerance policy for cell phone usage. You cannot have a zero tolerance policy for speaking out in class. You cannot have a zero tolerance policy for leaving the class without a pass. Like, those are not realistic scenarios where there's no nuance that you want to even consider before you decide to punish the student or not. And what does it do to our students? They already hate going to school. Now they like just reinforce that they're going to school and being monitored and surveilled, and they're punished. Like, school is a punishment when you phrase it this way. I wouldn't feel good about going to a place where I was constantly under scrutiny and no one listened to me when I gave them a good reason for why I was acting the way I was acting. It's just not conducive. And then we're like, oh, absenteeism and engagement crisis. It's like, they don't like you. Like, yeah, everything is a crisis, but they're making it into a crisis, right?
And then they're like, I don't know why they can't communicate or why they have poor mental health. Well, I don't know. They're not allowed to talk all day. As teenagers, probably you grew up closer to what I did, but I mean, we worked it out on the playground when people didn't like each other and somebody got into a fuss. You figured out what was going to happen next. And that was that. It was called problem solving.
I remember explicitly that we had, I guess, a school social worker or a guidance counselor who started the year off with what they called Kelso's choices. I don't know if this was a model of conflict resolution that schools were pushing at that time. And it was like a little wheel, and it had a little frog, and the frog had to make decisions in really difficult situations. Like, would it walk away? Would it talk to an adult? It was so infantilizing. And I guess we were young enough where it didn't feel infantilizing, but it stuck. But I mean, this is like pre-SEL being an actual term of art or a term of industry. But most of it was choices you make on your own in your social situations without an adult present. It was like one choice was to go talk to an adult. The other, like, 15 segments of the wheel were like, do I respond in this way? Do I like go get a friend? Do I just walk away from the situation? Do I pick up a book? Like, there was just like all of these other like choices that empowered the student to gain control of a situation where they were uncomfortable or there was conflict. And I feel like these days it's either we're just going to pretend that these conflicts don't happen, and when they do, they're just going to be explosive. Because I say bring back the frog, like, right? There is some level of like empowering our students to do these things and not just like blanket follow policies. Like, when someone's being mean to you, the response can be something different than, oh, you broke the rules, I'm going to tell on you. Again, there's context in which, yes, students should feel empowered to report to adults when their safety is in danger. But every conflict that a student has to be like, I'm going to go get my adult.
Yeah, that will be very annoying if that turns out to be. And adults will have zero time. Nor are there enough of them in a single place to manage that. But, it makes me think about, actually was having this conversation with my oldest the other day, and they're viewing things like policy, and it's like policy says don't do this thing. So you either don't do it or you're wrong. There isn't any leeway into like, now, okay, it's a problem. Now you're in trouble. Like cell phone in the pocket example. Tell them to put it in the bag. Also, what the policy said, and I kind of started to argue with the person who called me about it. And I was like, what? He's like, well, I mean, have you read the policy? And I was like, I have. And it's like, well, it says in the backpack. I was like, actually, it says out of sight, which also is inside of his pocket. He's like, well, no, we could see the outline. I was like, why are you looking at his pockets like that? That's weird. Why are you checking out my kid like that, man? I'm just saying that's creepy.
That's the real policy violation. Like,
yeah, stop looking at people's pockets so quick. But that's because they're looking for things.
That's the culture that it's become, right? Like, and it's not any individual teacher's fault. I just feel like we're moving in this general direction of like a very draconian environment where we're so afraid that the kids are being spoiled by the latest technologies. Like, there is some autonomy that, like, and how old is your child?
15 and 18 are the high school ones.
Yeah. Like, And at 15, you want them to develop some level of their own decision making. If he has decided that the cell phone in the pocket is not distracting, like he should be allowed to make that call for himself, right? And now, like, what does that do to his relationship with the school as a whole? The next time he walks into the school, how does he feel? Is he feeling like he's in a place that's supportive? I mean, I can't imagine if someone did that to me the next day walking in and being like, oh, this place is meant for my growth. Like,
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Let's do good work. I don't have a phone to distract me.
The cell phone policy obviously is one where there's a lot of this because I think students are obviously very tied to their phones. I think parents are split on what the right thing to do is anyways. And then I think schools are so scared of the distraction. I think they are coming down very hard on it. But this is true of all sorts of policing in schools, right? We've talked in other conversations about the AI detectors and how they're used, but it's the same thing, like creating this culture of let's catch the students to punish them. It does do something to the fabric of a school that I think is damaging, of course, to the teacher's own well-being. The students don't want to be in an environment like that is not conducive to learning. If you're constantly feeling like you're about to get in trouble, your brain like I am not a neurologist or a psychologist, but I guarantee you there is research that if you're constantly under surveillance and threat of getting in trouble, that you are not able to access the learning centers of your brain. Like,
it's on your basic hierarchy of needs of feeling safe, basic human needs. And the truth is, like, it also really skews my view of the school. And as we move into a new era of school choice, if you want my feedback on that, I'm like, I can come up with 10 different ways that you could curb that behavior if it's problematic before you take them out of school for a day. And if we're saying like school is this valuable and this is all the things they need, except for if you don't do these few minor things, like don't speak, put everything where I said to do it. Like if you're happy to just show up in your best robotic mode and go through and break down those passages and keep everything. Yeah, it's a very compliance driven thing, which we're seeing the pendulum has reached hopefully the peak of this compliance era because we're just stuck in such a time of like, when it comes to AI and education, you are either pro AI and everything should be AI for every single age, for every single subject all the time. It should just be open source, go for it, or anti, so ban it. And there's really nothing in between those. And the truth of the matter is most of us live somewhere on a spectrum of in between a lot of these things. Like for me, the AI, I don't think the little kids need to really do it because right now their energy should be spent on reading, writing, playing outside, and working out social issues with friends. As they get a little bit older and they begin to feel confident in writing, then they can use AI like you have with give me feedback about how this is going to be perceived by people that are not me because I can't see outside of my own perspective. So it's like an instant feedback tool, totally useful for middle school and high school kids. And as they get to high school, you can really start looking at breaking down the things that they've written on, like how good is this going to be? Is this going to match which I think Grammarly, I keep seeing these Grammarly commercials that Grammarly's already gotten on to submit your rubric and we'll fix it for you. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
In the last 4 years, Grammarly has gone from my favorite tool to my least favorite tool, and it's so sad. So pre-AI, we used to have like the nonprofit that I run. We used to have a nonprofit. Grammarly is good for everybody. Everybody loved it. It was in your browser all the time. And so if we were on WordPress or we were working on Google Doc, you got some like good feedback. I was a huge fan of it, and like the minute they started introducing AI features, we scrapped it. We're just like, this is not how we think about writing. This is not how we think about our voice. None of it is productive. It is like, what is the most conducive thing we can do to make this as difficult as possible for educators? And then Turnitin, on the other hand, like, is pretending to be this like benevolent player, and they're just like, let's reinforce this idea that we're going to just catch our kids someday. I was so annoyed this summer when they put out there, I'm sure you saw the AI humanizer detector.
I'd like to meet the human that humanized the AI.
And it's like so now okay, so someone put out an AI generator. You put out an AI generated text detector. Someone else put out an AI generated text detector bypasser, to which you put out an AI generated text detector bypasser detector. And it's like, how long is it going to take? And I wrote this in a comment on their CTO's post, and it was probably a little bit too like off the cuff, but like, and I was like, well, the next step is for somebody to put out an AI generated text detector bypasser detector bypasser. Like, this is just like a never ending circle. Like, this is not like, stop chasing this. This is not productive in any way. Like, you're going to go down to your student and be like, oh, like, I know you use an AI humanizer because this turned in thing told me to, but I have like zero evidence of it. Like, who's chasing this? I mean, yeah, they're multi-million-dollar companies, so maybe they know something that we don't, but like the snake oil does sell, right?
Well, there is a disconnection from purchaser all the way down to classroom because, like, when we get board members who may or may not have any educational background, may or may not be embedded in some of their own initiatives, all the way to like this trickle down effect. And I'm like, by the time it gets to the people who are actually using it, nobody has a clue why the person purchased. It's all about money. But this is a service driven industry. And I think sometimes people forget that. So we're not really training teachers coming out of university, assuming that their college of education has made it this far. We're not training them on how to manage classroom behavior, which, if that is not under control, everything else ceases to exist. So I don't know why we don't start there. And you have people who are like purchasing things that are meant to do a thing that in their mind is what's supposed to be happening in a classroom. And I'm like, you haven't been there for a minute, because I can assure you, last week, there's a kid that came between classes. 1 second she was fine, and the next second she was in a fetal position on the floor and sobbing uncontrollably. Sometimes people just forget that we're dealing with children. In the K to 12 system, I don't care if they're seniors, they're still children. And the only people who can help with that is other people.
That's true beyond children years, right? Like my favorite college professors were all the ones who were like caring, human. Like they weren't the ones who everything was about the syllabus and the assignments. Like there was joy of the learning. They cared about you. They cared about what the class meant for your larger prospects. Professor who I'm still in touch with 10 years later, like she and I cried after an election together. Like it was a human moment. Like we all sat there and we were taking a class on educational justice, and we were all just like, what's the point of talking about all of this when the real world is this far away from like our philosophical ideals? And I stuck around class, and I was like, I just don't know what to do with my career. I was sophomore in college. I was just like, I don't even know like how to find meaning in like what I want to do anymore, because it's so far fetched from like where we are in the world. And we cried. And like that's not replaceable. That stuck with me like that. And I took 6 more classes with her. And there I learned so much, and it shaped me as a person. And it was one of the most formative experiences of my life. But that was not because she enforced her syllabus policy and said, oh, the day after an election that shook the campus, we're gonna stick to the syllabus because it's on our policy. Like she's like, we're scrapping class today and we're all just going to talk and see how we feel. To an outsider, that's like, oh, like snowflakes and like, you're there to learn. But so much was learned in that moment. And everything else we learned the rest of the semester was built on a foundation of trust. We could trust this professor to be a human, to know who we were, to take us seriously as people. And in that one quote unquote lost class made up for so much more in dividends across the rest of the semester. But on paper, like people just are just like, this fetal position student just needs to go to the nurse and deal with it. But sometimes they need their teacher, who they have an existing relationship with, to step out with them for 5 minutes and ask them what's up. It is not all policies. It is not all like fixable by these other things. It's not, oh, maybe if we had an AI facial detector, we would have known last period that she was about to cry. It's such a dystopian world that we're pushing towards, pretending it's utopian. It is so sad, because I think fundamentally, like, the value of education is the relationships.
I I don't know what's going to happen with the sense of community from that.
And that's been eroding for years, right? Like, I think the standardized testing push has definitely done a lot of damage towards that. I think COVID accelerated this, like, oh, everybody's on a screen all the time. That does something towards it. And AI is definitely pushing us even farther in that direction. I was speaking to two nephews in California whose schools have major cuts because they're in like the Palo Alto area and everybody's going to private schools. So the public schools are like starting to shut down because they can't keep enough of them open. So class sizes are going up, resources are low. And these are both elementary school students, I believe third and fifth grade, if I remember correctly. I saw them over the summer, but they spent the entire day on their tablet. From the moment they step into the school to the moment they leave the school, it is all tablet mediated in service of differentiation. Like, oh, they get to learn at their own pace. It hits all the learning targets. But I'm like, can you tell me what the kid who's sitting next to you's like best friend, like what their favorite toy is, like what they want to be when they grow up?
That breaks the you're supposed to be silent rule.
Exactly. And it's like, what are you learning? Like, yes, now you've learned like basic arithmetic very, very well.
You are learning how to sit in a cubicle and not bother other people. That's what, unfortunately.
And it's so dystopian to me. And I don't, and it's scary. And I know we started with the book reading, but that's the like that. I can't sleep at night thinking about the fact that reading a book has become a privilege. We went through a phase where it was a privilege historically. It was a massive privilege. And we fought very, very hard, and technology helped us get to the point where it was no longer a privilege, right? Like great technological advancement, great social advancement. We were able to put a book in every single household. Like that was and the scheme of human society, like a major development for progress. And now we've decided we're all going to take that for granted.
I would like to go at least in another direction from this current direction. And the thing is, like, they don't talk about the books. Oh my gosh. I remember reading so many books. My mom was a teacher and we always had books. So, but now she's retired and writes them. I'm pretty sure it's a really good reason for her to convince my dad that she needs to travel some in her older years.
The Diaries of a Traveling Retired.
Well, the first book that she and her friend, so she writes, they co-author everything, was Louisiana Christmas, where they just went from town to town around Louisiana, where all these different settlements were the German settlements that and collected everybody's grandmother's best recipes.
But there's something so human about that, right? Could you get ChatGPT to like fake these recipes overnight? 110%. I could probably do it in the middle of our conversation. We won't have any sort of emotional response to it, right? And like this is a concept that I've been trying to figure out how to like get into a formal like written piece, but there's this Sanskrit aesthetic philosophy, so it studied like how humans consumed art, poetry, plays, and it talked about this concept of a shared heart. And so it said like when an artist produces some sort of work, it's best received by somebody who can share in some of the initial emotive response that like fueled the art. The example I go to is like there's this religious song that was sung in India pre-independence movement as a religious song, and it was based on selflessness and giving and taking care of your community. And then Mahatma Gandhi like reclaims it as a patriotic song for the independence movement. And so he capitalizes on a lot of the same themes. He says, oh, the self-reliance, the taking care of our people, the like taking care of the weakest members of our society. And they're that it's received well. It functions as a battle cry for independence. And then the current administration in India is a little bit more populist. They tried reclaiming it 3 years ago and they used it for like this military ad. And they were like talking about the force of the Indian military. And I saw it and I'm like, something is wrong, right? Like, because the actual emotion by which this was generated is not matching how we're experiencing it. I think there's something similar that happens when you're consuming like AI generated art, because that emotional response that generates it is missing. And so you have nothing to relate to. So even if the words on paper are the same, like that shared human connection that's like, oh, I feel what you felt when you were writing this or creating this or drawing this, that's missing. And I think that that's the problem, right? Like when we hear the story about your mom going like house to house during Christmas and getting Christmas recipes, there is something very human about that. We can put ourselves in those shoes. We can imagine what our grandmothers would say in those situations, or remember our favorite recipes. Think about the real humans behind there who share those recipes for decades with their families. And then you have ChatGPT generate in a second, and you're like, well, this is just words. Like, there's no substance that makes this like meaningful to me, right? Like the example that I use with students always is like if you had like a poem about the survival written by a Holocaust survivor versus one written by ChatGPT, and you read both. And initially you read both, and they both had all the hallmarks of a poem, and they had all like beautiful rhyming schemes and perfect poetry. And then you look at the bottom, the byline for one said someone who survived the Holocaust, and it was a ChatGPT. You will have a different emotive response. Can I like document that on paper? No, but like you can do a test of every human on this planet, and I guarantee you that there is something intrinsically different about those experiences. And I don't want to lose that. And I am really, really scared that we're in a direction of like moving towards completely losing our ability to appreciate.
My hope is that actually this will have the opposite effect. Okay, great. Can we use this now to initiate an era of the next great philosophers and scholars and artists, because the things that they're making and creating by hand and with their own minds will be valued so differently now that we have seen directly what it looks like to hand it off to a tech?
Jessica's perspective reminds us that the policies we develop become real for students. Whether we're discussing cell phone bans or the loss of personal writing, we have to ask ourselves, are we using technology and policy to build relationships or instead to enforce silence? Keep listening as we continue this season, exploring the ethics of education technology from every angle. And don't forget to pre-order my upcoming book, Ethical EdTech, for more on how to make policies that build those relationships by visiting ethicaledtech.org.
Thanks for listening to Margin of Thought. If this episode gave you something to think about, subscribe, rate, and review us. Also, share it with someone who might be asking similar questions. You can find the show notes, transcripts, and my newsletter at priten.org. Until next time, keep making space for the questions that matter.